Sometimes the cruelest people smiled the brightest in public. The sound of tearing fabric sliced through the grand ballroom so sharply that every conversation stopped at once. Crystal glasses froze midair. Forks hovered over porcelain plates. And under the glow of golden chandeliers, Naomi Carter stood trembling as the front of her black uniform dress hung in torn pieces from her shoulders, her breath trapped somewhere deep in her chest. Across from her, Victoria Whitmore slowly lowered her manicured hand, a smug smile spreading across her flawless face as if she had just done something amusing rather than humiliating another human being in front of 200 guests. Servants should learn their place, Victoria said coldly, loud enough for every person in the room to hear. A ripple of shocked laughter spread through the crowd, mixed with gasps and uncomfortable whispers. Naomi's fingers flew to her chest, desperately clutching the ripped fabric together, as heat flooded her cheeks. Her eyes darted around the room, but no one stepped forward. No one moved. They only stared. Some with pity. Some with discomfort. Some with the quiet satisfaction of people relieved that humiliation had landed on someone else instead of them. The polished marble floor beneath Naomi's shoes suddenly felt unsteady, as if the whole room were tilting beneath her feet. Just 10 minutes earlier, everything had still been normal. Naomi had been moving quietly through the Whitmore Estate's annual charity gala, balancing a silver tray of champagne flutes in careful hands, her posture straight and her expression calm. She had worked events like this before. Wealthy people always smiled bigger when cameras were around, always laughed louder when money filled the room, and always looked right through staff members as if they were furniture. But Naomi had learned long ago how to survive invisible. Keep your head down. Speak softly. Finish your shift. Go home. That was the rule. She needed this job too badly to risk anything else. Her little brother Caleb's asthma medication sat half paid for on the kitchen counter back home, and the rent notice taped to her apartment door had red letters. Screaming final warning across the top. Tonight's double-pay shift was supposed to help. It was supposed to buy breathing room. Instead, now she stood half-exposed in front of strangers while the richest woman in the county glared at her like trash beneath her heel. "You filthy thief!" Victoria snapped suddenly, her voice rising. "She stole my necklace!" The room shifted instantly. Gasps turned sharper. Judgment hardened in every stare. Naomi blinked in confusion, her lips parting. "What?" she whispered, barely able to breathe. Victoria pointed a trembling finger toward Naomi with theatrical outrage. "My diamond necklace is gone, and she was standing right beside me. Search her bag right now." Naomi's stomach dropped so violently she thought she might collapse. No, ma'am, I didn't take anything," she stammered, her voice cracking. "I swear I didn't, liar," Victoria hissed. Security guards at the far wall immediately started moving forward. Naomi's heart slammed against her ribs. Panic clawed up her throat as every guest turned to stare harder, their expressions no longer embarrassed but disgusted. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. "Please," she begged, shaking her head, backing away a step. "I didn't steal from anyone." But no one listened. No one defended her. And as the guards closed in, one of the young servers near the back of the room suddenly looked up toward the corner ceiling, his eyes narrowing at the blinking red security camera mounted above the chandelier. His entire face changed. Then he whispered under his breath, barely audible, "Oh my God! The cameras saw everything." Naomi's knees nearly buckled beneath her as the two guards approached, their polished shoes clicking against the marble floor with terrifying calm while the room watched in breathless silence. But before either man could reach her, the young server at the back suddenly rushed forward so fast his tray clattered onto a nearby table, his face pale as paper and his voice sharp with panic. "Wait," he blurted. "You need to stop." The security cameras saw the whole thing. Every sound in the ballroom died instantly. Victoria's smug expression twitched for the first time that night. "What did you say?" she snapped, her voice no longer smooth. The young man swallowed hard, glancing nervously toward the estate manager standing by the staircase. The camera above the chandelier points directly at this part of the room. It records everything during events for insurance purposes. A murmur swept through the guests like wind through dry leaves. Naomi stood frozen, tears burning in her eyes, her trembling fingers still clutching the torn front of her uniform together, as hope flickered weakly in her chest. Victoria laughed suddenly, but the sound came out too high, too forced. "Do not be ridiculous," she said sharply. "Why are we listening to a waiter?" But the estate manager, an older man named Thomas Green, was already moving, his face tight with concern. He turned toward one of the guards. "Go to the security office. Pull the footage. Now." Victoria's entire body stiffened. "Thomas," she said, stepping forward quickly, "that will not be necessary. This girl clearly stole from me. We do not need cameras to see what is obvious." But Thomas did not even look at her. His expression had shifted into something colder, more calculating, the expression of a man suddenly sensing danger beneath polished appearances. Naomi barely breathed as minutes stretched like hours, the entire ballroom suspended in unbearable silence. No music played. No one drank. No one dared move. Victoria stood rigid near the center of the room, her arms folded tightly across her designer gown, but the confidence in her face had begun to crack around the edges. Then the guard returned. "Sir," he said quietly to Thomas, holding a tablet and shaking hands. "You need to see this." Thomas took the device and stared down. His face drained of color almost instantly. Then his jaw tightened so sharply the muscle twitched beneath his cheek. Without a word, he turned the tablet outward toward the nearest guests. One by one, people crowded closer. Gasps exploded across the ballroom. Naomi could not see the screen from where she stood, but she knew something had changed from the way every face in the room twisted from suspicion into horror. "Oh my God!" someone whispered. "She planted it herself." Naomi's head jerked upward. Victoria's entire body went still. Thomas's voice rang through the ballroom like thunder. "The footage shows Miss Whitmore removing her necklace and placing it into her own purse before confronting Naomi." A collective wave of stunned murmurs erupted. "And then," Thomas continued, his tone turning razor-sharp, "it shows her deliberately grabbing Naomi's uniform and tearing it herself." Victoria's mouth fell open. "No, that is not enough," Thomas snapped, his voice so fierce the room flinched. Naomi's breath caught painfully in her throat as tears spilled down her cheeks, not from shame now but from sheer overwhelming relief. The guests who had stared at her with disgust moments before now stared at Victoria in open disbelief, their judgment completely reversed. Phones rose again, but now not to record Naomi. They pointed toward Victoria. Her breathing quickened. Her perfect posture crumbled. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to defend her, but no one moved. No one spoke. Then Thomas stepped toward Naomi slowly, removing his tuxedo jacket and gently draping it over her shoulders with quiet dignity. His voice softened as he looked her in the eyes. "Miss Carter," he said carefully, "I owe you a very deep apology." And behind them, Victoria Whitmore stood alone beneath the chandeliers, the weight of 200 silent stares crushing down around her like stone. The silence that followed felt heavier than thunder. Victoria Whitmore stood motionless beneath the crystal chandeliers, her lips parted but speechless, her face drained of every ounce of color as whispers spread through the ballroom like wildfire. The same people who had laughed with her minutes earlier now stared as if they had never known her at all. Naomi remained frozen where she stood, Thomas Green's tuxedo jacket wrapped around her trembling shoulders, warmth pressing softly against her skin, while tears streamed silently down her cheeks. She had imagined many endings to nights like this during years of enduring cruel customers, rude guests, and quiet humiliation, but never this. Never justice. Victoria forced out a brittle laugh, the kind people made when panic cracked through pride. "This is absurd," she said, though her voice trembled noticeably now. "There must be some mistake with the footage. It was edited. Someone manipulated it." But no one answered. No one rushed to agree. Thomas stared at her with cold disbelief. "The footage is time-stamped from 3 angles," he said sharply. "There is no mistake." Victoria's breathing quickened. Her eyes darted desperately through the crowd, searching for friendly faces, but found only judgment staring back. Then a woman near the front shook her head slowly and muttered, "I cannot believe I donated to her foundation." Another guest whispered, "She humiliated that poor girl for nothing." The words struck Victoria harder than any scream could have. Her carefully crafted image, her reputation, the polished social status she had spent years building, all of it was collapsing in real time beneath the weight of truth. "Everyone calm down," Victoria snapped suddenly, trying to regain control, but the authority in her voice was gone now, replaced by desperation. "This girl probably provoked me. You do not know what she said before the recording started?" Naomi's brow furrowed softly, pain flickering across her tearful face. Even now, even after being exposed, Victoria could not stop trying to twist the truth. Thomas stepped forward, his tone low and final. "That is enough, Victoria." The use of her first name instead of her title hit like a slap. Victoria blinked. "Excuse me?" Thomas straightened his posture, every inch of him radiating disgust. "You will apologize to Naomi. Right now. In front of everyone." The entire room held its breath. Victoria stared at him in disbelief, as if she could not comprehend anyone daring to command her. "You expect me," she whispered, almost laughing, "to apologize to staff?" Thomas's expression hardened even further. "No," he said coldly. "I expect you to apologize to the woman you falsely accused, humiliated, and tried to destroy tonight." Victoria's face twisted with humiliation. Her eyes glistened, but not from remorse. From rage. From wounded pride. Naomi stood perfectly still, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She did not want revenge. She did not want cruelty returned. But she wanted this moment. She wanted the truth spoken aloud. Victoria's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Then, with every guest watching, every phone still raised, every whisper hanging in the air, she turned toward Naomi. The words looked like poison in her mouth. "I apologize," she forced out through gritted teeth. Thomas's eyes narrowed. "Properly." Victoria inhaled shakily, her voice nearly cracking. "I am sorry." "Naomi." Naomi stared at her, emotions swelling inside her chest so strongly she thought she might break. For the first time all night, Victoria Whitmore looked smaller than her. Not in height. Not in wealth. But in spirit. Naomi swallowed hard and nodded once, saying nothing. Her silence somehow carried more dignity than any speech ever could. Then Thomas turned to the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced firmly, "Miss Whitmore is no longer welcome at any event held on this estate." Gasps erupted instantly. Victoria's entire body jerked as if struck by lightning. "You cannot be serious," she whispered. But Thomas already gestured toward the doors. "Escort her out." And as Victoria was led through the crowd she once ruled, Naomi watched the woman who had tried to destroy her walk into the same humiliation she had planned for someone else, while the ballroom remained utterly silent except for the sound of heels trembling against marble. Victoria's heels clicked unevenly across the marble floor as security escorted her toward the towering front doors, but each sharp step sounded weaker than the one before, stripped of the confidence she had carried when she first entered the ballroom that night. Guests moved aside in silence, parting for her like water, yet none of them offered sympathy, none of them looked away. They watched with cold fascination as a woman who had built her life on status and cruelty was forced to walk through the same public shame she had tried to place on someone else. Victoria kept her chin lifted, but tears shimmered in her eyes, her face burning beneath the weight of 200 stares. The moment the doors shut behind her, the entire room seemed to exhale. Naomi stood motionless in the center of the ballroom, still wrapped in Thomas Green's tuxedo jacket, her breathing shaky and uneven as if her body still had not realized the nightmare was over. Her hands trembled against the soft fabric, her knuckles pale from gripping it too tightly. Thomas turned to her with a gentleness that had not been in his voice all evening. "Miss Carter," he said quietly, "please come with me." Naomi blinked, startled, and nodded before following him through the parted crowd. Every step she took now felt strange. The same guests who had stared at her with disgust minutes earlier now stepped aside respectfully, many lowering their eyes in visible shame. One woman softly whispered, "I am so sorry," as Naomi passed, but Naomi only nodded faintly, too emotionally drained to answer. Thomas led her through a side hallway lined with gold-framed paintings until they reached his private office, a quiet room paneled in dark oak with soft amber lighting glowing from wall sconces. Once the door shut behind them, the silence felt warm instead of heavy. Thomas walked behind his desk, exhaled deeply, and looked at Naomi with regret plain on his face. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. Naomi stood stiffly near the doorway, still unsure if this was real. "You do not owe me anything, sir," she replied softly. "You fixed it." Thomas shook his head immediately. "No. I allowed it to happen under my roof in the first place." He paused, his expression tightening with guilt. "I should have stopped her before it ever got that far." Naomi lowered her eyes, unsure what to say. Thomas studied her quietly for a moment before asking, "How long have you been working events?" Naomi hesitated. 3 years, sir. Catering, private staff, cleaning. Whatever I can get." "And before that?" Thomas asked. Naomi swallowed. "Community college. I studied business administration for 2 years." Thomas blinked in surprise. "Studied?" Naomi nodded faintly, looking down. "I had to leave when my mother got sick. Then after she passed, I had to help raise my younger brother." Thomas leaned back slowly in his chair, processing her answer. "So you gave up your education to care for your family?" Naomi gave a small shrug, as if the sacrifice were nothing worth mentioning. "Family comes first." Thomas stared at her for several seconds, then smiled sadly. "That tells me more about your character than anything else tonight." Naomi looked up, confused. Thomas folded his hands together on the desk. "I run more than charity galas, Miss Carter. I manage Whitmore Holdings Foundation Board and several private companies." Naomi's eyes widened slightly. "Tonight I watched how you handled public humiliation with more grace than most executives handle pressure in a boardroom." Naomi's lips parted in surprise. "Sir?" Thomas slid a business card across the desk toward her. "I think someone with your composure, dignity, and strength belongs somewhere better than carrying trays for people who do not deserve your service." Naomi stared down at the card in disbelief, her fingers trembling again, but this time for a completely different reason. "Come see me Monday morning," Thomas said softly. "I would like to offer you an interview." Naomi's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes filled with tears again as she whispered, barely audible, "For what position?" Thomas smiled. "Assistant coordinator in operations. Full benefits. Salary. Advancement opportunity." Naomi covered her mouth with shaking fingers, unable to process what she was hearing. And in that quiet office, with tears shining in her eyes and her heart pounding against her ribs, Naomi Carter realized that the worst night of her life had somehow become the night everything changed. Monday morning arrived wrapped in pale sunlight and nervous anticipation. Naomi stood outside the towering glass building of Whitmore Holdings with Thomas Green's business card clutched tightly in her hand, her reflection staring back at her from the polished doors in a borrowed navy blazer and simple black flats. She had barely slept the night before. Every few hours she woke convinced the offer had been some dream born from exhaustion and emotion, but the card remained on her nightstand every time she checked, its embossed silver lettering glinting softly in the moonlight like proof that miracles sometimes came dressed as impossible moments. Naomi inhaled deeply and stepped inside. The lobby gleamed with marble floors so polished they reflected the overhead lights like water, and the scent of fresh coffee drifted through the air from somewhere deeper in the building. Men and women in press suits crossed the floor carrying tablets and leather portfolios, their voices calm and purposeful, their shoes tapping in rhythm against the stone. Naomi felt suddenly small standing among them, painfully aware that just 3 nights ago she had been serving drinks in places like this, not walking into them. She approached the reception desk with trembling hands. "Good morning," she said softly. "My name is Naomi Carter. Mr. Green asked me to come." The receptionist's face brightened instantly. "Of course, Miss Carter. We have been expecting you." Naomi blinked in surprise. The woman stood and gestured politely toward the elevators. 32nd floor. Executive offices. Naomi's stomach twisted as she stepped inside the elevator, her pulse pounding louder with every floor number that lit above the doors. By the time she reached the top, her palms were slick with sweat. Thomas greeted her personally in the hallway outside his office, smiling warmly the moment he saw her. "You came," he said. Naomi let out a nervous laugh. "I almost turned around 3 times in the parking garage." Thomas chuckled softly. "That means you are exactly where you are supposed to be." He led her through a maze of sleek hallways into a bright conference room overlooking the city skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the polished table in morning light, and a folder sat waiting neatly at the center. Thomas motioned for her to sit. "This is not a formal interview," he said as he took the seat across from her. "I already know enough about your character." Naomi stared at him, uncertain. Thomas folded his hands calmly. "I simply want to know one thing. Why did you stay calm that night when most people would have lashed out?" Naomi looked down at her hands, considering the question carefully. "Because anger would have made me look guilty," she said softly. "And because my mother always taught me that dignity is the one thing no one can take unless you hand it to them." Thomas's expression shifted, almost as if her words had struck something personal inside him. He nodded slowly. "That is exactly the answer I hoped for." He pushed the folder toward her. Naomi opened it carefully, her eyes widening as she scanned the paperwork inside. Offer letter. Salary details. Health insurance. Retirement plan. Paid training. Her breath caught. The salary alone was more money than she had ever imagined making in a year. Tears instantly blurred her vision. "Sir," she whispered shakily, "this cannot be real." Thomas smiled gently. "It is very real, Naomi." She pressed her fingers over her mouth, overcome. "I do not know what to say." "Say yes," Thomas replied warmly. Naomi laughed through her tears, nodding quickly. "Yes. Yes, of course, yes." Thomas stood and extended his hand across the table. Naomi shook it with trembling fingers, and for the first time in years, something deep inside her chest loosened. Hope. Real hope. But just as that warmth settled over her, Thomas's assistant rushed into the room, pale-faced and breathless. "Sir," she said urgently, "there is someone downstairs demanding to see Miss Carter." Thomas frowned. "Who?" The assistant swallowed hard. "Victoria Whitmore." Naomi's entire body went cold. The room seemed to lose all warmth in an instant. Naomi's fingers tightened around the offer letter so suddenly the paper crinkled beneath her hand, her pulse hammering violently in her throat as if her body had forgotten how to breathe. Thomas's expression darkened immediately. "She is not supposed to be in this building," he said sharply, rising from his chair. The assistant shifted nervously. "Security tried to stop her, sir, but she is refusing to leave. She says she will not go until she speaks to Naomi personally." Naomi's stomach dropped. Every painful memory from that night came rushing back at once like ice water through her veins. The tearing sound of fabric. The laughter. The stares. The shame. Her fingers trembled against the edge of the table. Thomas noticed instantly. His voice softened. "You do not have to see her if you do not want to." Naomi swallowed hard, staring down at the floor as conflicting emotions churned inside her chest. Part of her wanted to run. Part of her wanted to hide. But another part, quieter and stronger, whispered something she had never felt before. Confidence. She slowly lifted her chin. "No," she said softly. "I will see her. Thomas studied her face for a moment, then nodded once. Then we do this on your terms. 10 minutes later, Naomi stood near the center of the executive lobby, her new employment folder clutched against her chest while sunlight poured through the towering windows behind her, bathing the marble floor in pale gold. Employees nearby slowed their steps, sensing tension in the air, their curious glances flickering toward the elevator bank as the doors slid open. Victoria Whitmore stepped out. But she looked nothing like the woman Naomi remembered from the gala. Her hair was pulled back messily instead of perfectly styled. Her designer coat hung crooked on her shoulders. Dark circles sat beneath eyes that looked hollow from sleepless nights. And for the first time since Naomi had met her, Victoria did not carry herself like royalty. She looked broken. Their eyes met across the lobby. Victoria hesitated before walking forward, slower than expected, her expensive heels tapping softly instead of sharply. Naomi stood still, forcing her shoulders straight. Victoria stopped several feet away. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Then Victoria exhaled shakily. "You ruined my life," she whispered. Naomi blinked in disbelief. Thomas, standing beside her, stepped forward angrily, but Naomi lightly lifted a hand to stop him. Her eyes stayed on Victoria. "I ruined your life?" Naomi repeated quietly, stunned. Victoria's jaw tightened as tears welled in her eyes. "My board removed me from the foundation. Sponsors pulled funding. 3 magazines dropped me from their covers. People are calling me a monster." Her voice cracked with bitterness. Naomi stared at her in silence, unable to believe what she was hearing. Even now, after everything, Victoria saw herself as the victim. "You did that to yourself," Naomi said calmly, her voice low but steady. Victoria flinched as if slapped by the truth. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I made a mistake," she whispered. Naomi's expression hardened for the first time. "No," she said softly. "A mistake is spilling wine. A mistake is forgetting someone's name. What you did was a choice." The entire lobby fell silent. Victoria's face crumpled, her mouth trembling as the weight of those words sank into her. Naomi stepped forward slowly now, her voice still gentle but carrying a strength she had never known she possessed. "You chose to humiliate me because you thought I would be too small to fight back. You chose to lie because you thought no one would believe me over you. You chose cruelty because you thought your money would protect you from consequences." Victoria looked down, tears dripping silently onto the marble floor. Naomi's voice softened again. "And the worst part is, even now, you still think your pain matters more than what you did to me." Victoria broke then, fully. Her shoulders collapsed inward as quiet sobs shook her frame. For the first time, genuine shame crossed her face. Naomi watched silently, her own anger slowly fading into something quieter. Sadness. Not for herself, but for how empty a person must be inside to destroy others so easily. Victoria looked up through tears and whispered the words Naomi never expected to hear. "I do not know how to be better." And for a moment, the entire room stood frozen, waiting for Naomi's answer. The question hung in the air like something sacred. Even the employees crossing the lobby had stopped moving now, pretending not to stare while openly listening, their eyes fixed on Naomi as Victoria Whitmore stood before her with tears streaking down her face and the shattered remains of pride trembling in her voice. "I do not know how to be better," Victoria whispered again, softer this time, as if saying the words aloud made her ashamed of how true they were. Naomi stood still, her fingers resting lightly against the folder pressed to her chest, her heart beating steadily now instead of racing. Just days ago she would have given anything to watch Victoria suffer. To see her humiliated the way she had been humiliated. To see her cry the way she had cried. But standing here now, looking into the hollow eyes of the woman who had once towered over her with cruelty, Naomi did not feel victorious. She felt something else. She felt the strange heaviness of realizing that revenge was never as satisfying as people imagined. Thomas remained silent beside her, watching carefully, trusting her to decide what happened next. Naomi took a slow breath. "Then start by listening," she said quietly. Victoria blinked, stunned. Naomi's voice stayed calm, but every word landed with weight. Listen when people tell you that your words hurt them. Listen when someone says your power scares them. Listen when the people around you stop praising you and start fearing you. Victoria stared at her, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Naomi stepped closer, not with anger but with quiet strength. And most of all, she said softly, stop believing being rich makes you right. The words struck deep. Victoria's face crumpled, fresh tears spilling faster now. Naomi looked at her for a long moment, then continued, her voice gentler than before. You want to know how to be better? Start by learning how to see people who cannot do anything for you. The people you ignore. The people you talk over. The people you assume are beneath you. Learn to see them as human before life forces you to. Victoria bowed her head, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The entire lobby stood still in reverent silence. Naomi could have crushed her in that moment. Could have mocked her. Could have humiliated her the way she had been humiliated. Everyone would have understood. Everyone might have applauded. But instead Naomi reached into her purse, pulled out a folded tissue, and gently held it out toward Victoria. A quiet gasp moved through the room. Victoria looked at the tissue in Naomi's hand as if she could not understand what she was seeing. Why? She whispered through tears. After everything I did, why are you being kind to me? Naomi's eyes softened. Because if I become cruel just because you were cruel to me, she said gently, then you win. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. Naomi pressed the tissue lightly into her shaking hand. I forgive you, she said softly, but forgiveness does not erase consequences. It only means I refuse to carry hatred for you in my heart. Victoria broke completely then, crying openly into the tissue while her shoulders shook beneath her coat. Thomas looked at Naomi with something close to awe. Several employees nearby wiped at their own eyes, visibly moved by what they had just witnessed. Victoria slowly looked up, mascara streaked and voice trembling. I do not deserve your forgiveness. Naomi nodded once. No, she said honestly. But maybe one day you will. Those words seemed to hit Victoria deeper than anything else. She nodded through tears, clutching the tissue tightly as if it were something precious. Then she whispered, Thank you, before turning and slowly walking back toward the elevator, smaller somehow with every step. No one mocked her. No one laughed. They simply watched in silence as a broken woman left with more humility than she had ever carried in all her years of wealth. The elevator doors closed behind her with a soft chime. The lobby remained still for one breath, then two. Then Thomas turned slowly toward Naomi, his voice low with admiration. Miss Carter, he said quietly, I offered you a job because I thought you had professionalism. But after what I just witnessed, he smiled faintly, I think I may have underestimated you. Naomi blinked. Sir? Thomas's smile widened. Come with me. There is something else we need to discuss. Naomi followed Thomas back toward the executive conference room, her mind still spinning from everything that had happened in the lobby. But now there was a strange calm in her chest, the kind that came after surviving something painful and realizing you had come out stronger on the other side. Thomas held the door open for her, then stepped inside behind her and motioned for her to sit at the long, polished table again. Sunlight poured through the towering windows, washing the room in warm gold, and Naomi sat slowly, still unsure what more there could possibly be to discuss after everything that morning. Thomas remained standing for a moment, his hands resting against the back of the chair across from her, studying her carefully like a man choosing his next words with great precision. Then he finally sat and folded his hands together. Naomi, he said, his voice calm but serious. Do you know what kind of people are hardest to find in business? Naomi blinked, caught off guard by the question. No, sir. Thomas gave a small smile. Not smart people. Not ambitious people. There are thousands of those. The rarest people to find are those with integrity when no one forces them to have it. Naomi listened quietly, unsure where he was going. Thomas leaned forward slightly. When Victoria humiliated you, you stayed composed. When she accused you falsely, you remained honest. And when she stood broken in front of you today, you showed mercy when most people would have chosen revenge. He shook his head slowly in admiration. That is not normal strength, Naomi. That is leadership. Naomi's eyes widened. Sir, I do not think I understand. Thomas reached into the folder beside him and slid another packet across the table. Naomi stared down at it in confusion before slowly opening it. Her breath caught instantly. New paperwork. A different title. Different salary. Bigger numbers. Her eyes widened further with every line she read. Senior Executive Assistant to Director of Operations, she whispered breathlessly. Her eyes jumped to the salary. Nearly triple the previous offer. Naomi looked up so fast her chair nearly shifted beneath her. Sir, this has to be a mistake. Thomas smiled warmly. It is not. Naomi shook her head in disbelief, tears already forming. But I do not have experience for this. I have never worked in an office before. Thomas's voice softened. Skills can be taught. Character cannot. Naomi's lips parted but no words came. Thomas continued, his tone steady and sincere. I have hired people with degrees from Harvard who lacked half the grace you showed in that lobby today. I have met executives worth millions who do not possess your emotional discipline. You think I am investing in your resume, Naomi? He smiled. I am investing in who you are. Tears spilled freely down Naomi's cheeks now. She laughed shakily through them, overwhelmed beyond words. I do not know what to say. Thomas leaned back gently. Say yes again. Naomi laughed harder this time, covering her mouth as tears streamed down her face. Yes, she whispered. Yes, absolutely yes. Thomas stood and extended his hand once more. Naomi rose quickly and shook it, her entire body trembling with emotion. Then Thomas surprised her by gently placing his other hand over hers and saying quietly, Your mother would be proud of the woman you became. That sentence broke something inside her. Naomi pressed her lips together tightly, trying not to sob as tears blurred her vision completely. She nodded because speaking was impossible. Thomas released her hand and gave her a moment to breathe before smiling again. Go home for today, he said warmly. Celebrate with your brother. We start tomorrow. Naomi nodded quickly, clutching the folder to her chest like it was the most precious thing she had ever held. As she stepped outside the building 20 minutes later, the city air felt different somehow. Brighter. Lighter. Cars moved through the streets below. Sunlight reflected off windows overhead. People rushed past in suits and sneakers and heels, but for the first time in years Naomi did not feel invisible among them. She stood on the sidewalk smiling through tears, staring down at the offer letter in disbelief. Then her phone rang. She answered immediately. Caleb? Her younger brother's excited voice burst through the speaker. Naomi, you are not going to believe this. The pharmacy called. Somebody paid off all Mom's old medical debt and covered my medication for the next year. Naomi froze in place, stunned. Her brow furrowed. What? Who? There was a pause. Then Caleb said, confused. They said the payment came from someone named Victoria Whitmore. Naomi stood motionless on the sidewalk, the city noise fading around her as tears filled her eyes once more. Naomi stood frozen on the crowded sidewalk, the phone pressed to her ear while the city rushed around her in a blur of motion and sound, her brother's voice still echoing in her mind as tears welled in her eyes for what felt like the 100th time that day. Are you still there? Caleb asked softly. Naomi swallowed hard, blinking against the sunlight. Yes, she whispered. I am here. Her little brother laughed in disbelief on the other end. Can you believe that? They said every penny is covered. We do not owe anything anymore, Naomi. Nothing. Naomi pressed trembling fingers to her lips, overcome with emotion. For years every paycheck, every double shift, every sleepless night had gone toward surviving. Toward scraping together rent. Toward medicine. Toward debt collectors. towards simply making it to next week. And now suddenly, impossibly, that crushing weight was gone. "I will be home soon," she whispered through tears. "We are celebrating tonight." She ended the call and stood still for a long moment beneath the warm afternoon sun, staring down at the pavement, while emotions flooded through her chest too fast to sort through. Gratitude. Relief. Shock. And somewhere beneath it all, something quieter. Understanding. Victoria had not just apologized with words. She had chosen action. Real action. Naomi looked up toward the bright sky above the buildings and exhaled shakily. Maybe people really could change. The next morning Naomi arrived early for her first official day, dressed in a cream blouse and tailored slacks, her new employee badge hanging around her neck and her shoulders pulled back with a confidence she had never worn before. As she stepped into the building, employees smiled warmly and greeted her by name. Not because she was carrying trays. Not because she was invisible support staff in the background. But because she belonged there now. She stepped into the elevator with a nervous smile, clutching her tablet and notebook against her chest, and rode to the 32nd floor where her future waited. Weeks passed quickly after that. Naomi learned fast, worked harder than anyone expected, and within months Thomas trusted her with projects others spent years waiting to touch. Her mind for organization, her calm under pressure, and her quiet emotional intelligence made her invaluable. People who once might have overlooked her now listened when she spoke. And Naomi never forgot what it felt like to be unseen. She remembered every painful second of it. So when interns looked nervous, she encouraged them. When janitors passed by, she greeted them warmly. When assistants spilled papers or stumbled through presentations, she helped instead of judging. She became the kind of leader she once prayed someone would be for her. Then one rainy evening nearly 6 months later, Naomi was leaving work when she noticed someone standing across the street beneath a black umbrella. Victoria Whitmore. Naomi paused. Victoria looked healthier than before somehow, though humbler too. Simpler clothes. Softer face. Less pride in her posture. She stepped carefully across the street as Naomi approached. "I hope I am not bothering you," Victoria said gently. Naomi shook her head. "No." Victoria gave a nervous smile. "I only wanted to tell you. I have been volunteering every week now. Women's shelters. Community kitchens. Places I never would have stepped into before." Naomi listened quietly. Victoria looked down, then back up with sincere eyes. "I keep hearing your words in my head. About learning to see people." A faint emotional smile touched Naomi's lips. Victoria swallowed hard. "I still have a long way to go. But I wanted you to know. I am trying." Naomi nodded softly. "That matters." Victoria smiled through shining eyes. "Thank you for not becoming cruel when you had every reason to." Naomi